You're listening to Alcoholics Alive, where recovered members of Alcoholics Anonymous share their experience on how they live AA as a way of life. None of our participants get paid or speak for AA. Here are your hosts, Shank and Wayne. If you're a regular listener, we are in search for more meeting shrapnel. So we've got a long list, but we're going to chew through a lot of it this season. So if you've got any suggestions or you hear any cool, funny, fiction or nonfiction statements, send it to us, and we'll try to cover it. Welcome everybody. We've got a good episode today. We're still moving forward with the traditions this season, and we actually have a return guest, Tammy. Tammy was on our I think it was our second episode on Step 2.
That's right.
About a year ago. So Tammy, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be back.
We're glad to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Tammy, alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 10th, 1995. I have a home group. My home group is the 12 and 12 study group out of Asheville, North Carolina, on the northeast side of Asheville. We meet on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. We read a step each week, and on the last Wednesday of the month, we read the tradition of the month. So nice. I love a group that stays in the steps, stays in the tradition, stays in our literature, and like my home group. I have a sponsor. I am a sponsor, and I believe in the being of service to Alcoholics Anonymous. And my story is most people's story of thank God I never, right? Like if I had $1 for every time I heard somebody in a meeting say thank God I never, I'd be a rich woman today. Yep. But as it stands, I still have a day job. But so what happened is in 1995, at the age of 23, I became a drunk driver who killed somebody in a car accident and injured other people. And as a result of that, I got charged with 4 felonies and had a lot of consequences. And what I know today is that consequences and fear won't keep me sober. But in my case, that's how I got sober. One of the consequences that I had was to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I didn't think I belonged, in spite of all the evidence to the contrary. I was in a really good bubble of self-delusion, telling you that I was too young, I was too this, it was just one time, it was my first offense, I couldn't be an alcoholic, you give me a reason I am, and I'll tell you why I'm not, right? But what happened for me is those consequences and that fear kept me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous long enough, kept me coming to Alcoholics Anonymous long enough that I was finally able to break through that self-delusion, that I was finally able to hear what the people in the rooms were telling me, what the program that they were sharing with me. And I was finally able to get to a point of honesty, of being open-minded enough and willing enough to do the work, to take the steps. I realized somewhere along there that I belonged in Alcoholics Anonymous, and the fear and consequences might have still been there. They eventually went away and I stayed, and very, very grateful that I did stay.
All right. Well, we're grateful you did too.
Yes.
Yep. Very much so. Thank you for that. Shank, what's our topic today?
Our topic today, we are on episode 4 of season 5. So we have arrived at tradition 4. Whoa. Tradition 4 in the long form says, with respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. But when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups also, those groups ought to be consulted. And no group, regional committee, or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. On such issues, our common welfare is paramount. And then the short form says, each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. So that brings us to our first question from the Traditions Grapevine checklist. And it is, do I insist that there are only a few right ways of doing things in AA? What do y'all think? I may actually still be there.
So,
What do you think?
when I read, I've had the checklist that you read the question from for a while, and when I read that question, it's one of those questions where I think words matter, right? Because if that question were to say, "Do I think there are only a few right ways?" my answer would be a resounding yes, right? Yes. But what the question says is, "Do I insist there are only a few right ways of doing things?" And my answer today is no, I don't. This is one of the questions where I did a little bit of research on Tradition 4, obviously knowing I was coming here. And I found this article that really just resonated with me. And it was from a guy, his name is Bob Pearson, and it was from the 36th General Service Conference in 1986. And it was his 18th General Service Conference and his final one as well. And what he said is, if the fellowship ever falters or fails, it will not be because of any outside cause. And he named things like treatment, young people, non-conference group literature, drugs, etc. He went on to say, if the fellowship ever falters or fails, it will be because we can't control our own egos or get along with each other, because we have too much fear and rigidity and not enough trust and common sense. And to me, that really spoke to this question of insisting I'm right, and that rigidity of insisting that my way is the right way, the only way that is acceptable, right? And I think, just from my personal experience of being involved in general service and my group and group conscience and things like that, that rigidity is what is going to harm me, harm my group, and harm everything. That this tradition, one of the things it says is it gives us the right to be wrong, right?
Yep.
That when I'm in group conscience and I'm the minority opinion, I'm the only one saying, no, we shouldn't. And the group says, but we want to, and we will, and we're going to, and we're going to outvote you. I have to just trust, right? I have to trust that it is going to self-correct. And that either the group has the right to be wrong or I have the right to be wrong. It could be either one in that situation, right? And so if this question said, do I think I'm right? Probably. Do I insist I'm right? Not so much today.
Yeah.
What about you, Jay Wayne?
Well, I definitely think I'm right. There's no doubt about that. As a matter of fact, I mean that it's part of why we started the podcast, because we thought that there might be an easier or a more simple way to get back to AA steps and traditions, and to use our previous guest, one of his terms, today's AA. Probably a little different than what the book says. Anyway, I've gone through phases of where I remember there was a time, probably between like 6 or 8 years and 10 years sober, where I thought you had to do it this way through the book. And I don't think I insisted that to anybody, but it was probably implied. And the reality of it today is that, I mean, I think there are better ways to do Alcoholics Anonymous. But you know what? I know people, I'm friends with people that have been sober for decades that have never done a 4-step out of the Big Book. I'm friends with people, I know people that have, never joined a home group. And they've been sober forever. And I personally don't want a whole lot of, of what they have, but they're, if you get honest about it and just look at the reality of it, there are many ways that people stay sober and many ways that groups do things that appear to work for people and that are under the AA umbrella. So it would be kind of naive to insist that one way is the only way. I do think that there's some better ways.
Well, I think that one of our previous guests, this tradition kind of goes back to, well, it says in the language of the heart that tradition four is a specific application of general principles already outlined in traditions one and two.
Hmm.
And one of our previous guests, Shelley, told a story about in a business meeting and da da da, and the group conscience had voted. But what she really learned was that the people in the meeting voted and the group conscience spoke later because they didn't end up doing what they had voted about doing. Which I thought was a really interesting story. And Shelley can clean that up if I botched it, but that's what I understood that she said. There were definitely several years in my sobriety where I had a sponsor and that sponsor helped many, many people, still does. But I really got obsessed with this idea that I was doing AA right and that the kind of service I was doing, I had my hands in everything, which listen, I stayed sober and I grew in my relationship with God during that time. But I definitely thought that I was doing AA the way it was supposed to be done. And I think I've talked about it several times in person on this podcast that, over the last several years, it's been kind of going back to what really worked for me very simply using the book, trying to help people. Maybe I don't insist that there are only a few right ways, but maybe similar to what you are, there are ways of doing things that I think are simple, that I understand, that have worked for me. Um, but also someone over the last several years has pointed out to me, like, not everyone needs to do what you do to stay sober in AA
Hmm.
or outside of it.
Right.
So, which I can't fathom. I'm just like, well, but it works so well for me. Like I've been able to stay sober all this time. Similar to Tammy, while people are saying like, oh my gosh, the thing happened to you. It's so horrible. Oh my gosh, you're my worst nightmare with consequence. So maybe I don't insist, but there were probably several years in there where I did insist.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it makes me think of the insisting, going back to tradition two, where they talk about the bleeding deacon, right?
Mhm.
Which I listened to tradition two, sorry, but
Mhm.
I mean, that's one of the great things is I think the bleeding deacon is the great example of insisting that I am right and my way
Yeah.
is the right way.
Yep.
All right. Our next question is, am I willing to help a newcomer go to any lengths, his lengths, not mine, to stay sober?
Can I have an example, please? I was thinking about this and I want to say yes, but then I think, well, I mean, is my answer yes? Like, I mean, what do you mean? Like, what do those links look like? Like, how am I supposed to help? And
Right.
I always just, when I was reading this and reading some literature in relation to Tradition 4, I don't know what strikes me. And listen, I am not like Queen AA, but I know what's going on in AA and I'm well informed and I talk to a lot of people and I show up to assemblies and workshops and different things. Um, so I always, or at least right now, I kind of assume that this means, well, I help them go to their links, which are probably not as much as mine, which is probably
Well,
not showing up to the home group at 5 o'clock and being there until 8. Changing my work schedule in relation to AA, trying to put AA first. Some people, there were times in my sobriety where I couldn't do that, and people still sponsored me and helped me. And I was going to the greatest lengths that I could at that time, I think.
yeah, when I first saw the question, I didn't completely understand it. Not sure that I do now. Um, but I think it means that, yeah, I mean, I guess that people have different abilities or different schedules, different things that they do, and that it's not a term I like, but
Well, and
we've people say meet people where they're at, right?
it also kind of makes me
It,
think of like there was this point in time where I was being sponsored and I thought that I needed some outside help with something. And my sponsor at that time was like, well, AA can solve all your problems. And I don't know if that was true or not true, but I did go get some outside help for like a year and a half or something else and like childhood stuff, and it was very helpful. I didn't like continue doing that until now. Um, she wasn't like all for it, but she didn't tell
Hmm.
me I couldn't do it that I remembered. And if she did, then I was like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. If I'm
Right.
just imagining how
Well,
the
that
conversation went.
I get that. I guess that's autonomy. Because when I first
Yeah.
read the question, I'm like, what's that has to do with the tradition?
Hmm.
And I guess we give people autonomy to their right to be wrong, give all people autonomy to do what they can do,
Hmm.
instead of us putting maybe, demands on them would be one way to look at that.
That makes a lot of sense when we kind of hash through it like that. Because I can very much relate to what Susie was just saying. That yeah, my life has evolved in such a way that I have a lot of time to dedicate to being of service to AA. It's just the way, it's happened for me. And so I'm involved in my group. I have a position. I'm involved at the district. I'm involved with corrections. I'm involved with this. I'm involved with that. You have a committee. Sure, I'll be at whatever. So I can spend a lot of time in AA. But for me to think that you have that same ability
Yeah.
is kind of short-sighted, right? That you should be of service to AA as much as I am or exactly like I am. And that's just not the case for people who have a different lifestyle or have made different choices.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't mean that they're not doing it right or they're not good A members because they can't do everything that other people do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's how I took
Hmm.
it. Okay. Our third question. Do I share my knowledge of AA tools with other members who may not have heard of them?
Yes, yes,
Okay,
yes,
so
and
maybe
yes.
you can explain to me more of what this is
Well,
implying here.
So when I read this question, what I think about it is passing it on. So there was a topic that came up on a previous podcast. I have no idea when. It was a shrapnel, actually. It was a shrapnel now that I think about it. And the shrapnel was about a service sponsor, right? And it made me think of this type of topic. So I have run into countless people, during, my sobriety that have not been exposed to the traditions, that have not been exposed to group conscience, that have not been exposed to service at the area level, at the CPC level, at the treatment level, at the whatever level, right? And that's not good or bad or right or wrong. That's just because my personal opinion is people pass on what's been passed on to them, and they can't pass on something that they don't know about or haven't been given. And so people are sponsored through the steps and then given whatever other information, the sponsor has. But a lot of times, if the sponsor hasn't been involved in those things, those people aren't exposed to it. And so when I read this question, I always talk about like traditions and service and getting involved in the group and getting involved in the district and taking a treatment commitment and doing this. And I run into people all the time that go, oh, what's that? Oh, how do I get involved in that? And so when I read this question, it's about just exposing people to all the kinds of ways you can be of service to AA, all three sides of the triangle, not just the one side of the triangle, all three sides of the triangle. The second one we're talking about now, right? And just making sure that they get exposed to that, because I have seen so many people who just don't get exposed to it.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe too, like just where I got sober and the group I got sober was a, three legacy group and yada yada. And everyone, people were always involved in things. So it
Yeah.
wasn't like I never had a chance to not know about what was going on, where I needed to be. I was going to be sentenced and going to prison. And they were like, oh, well, a week before that, 2 weeks before that, there's this conference, the Midwinter Conference, and we signed you up to be a greeter. Like, you need to dress appropriately. I'm like, I don't think I have time to do that. Like, I should probably be spending time with my family or making money and saving it. Um, so it was never an option to not know, and everyone was so involved. Like, I feel so grateful that that is where and how I got sober, and that people were very direct with me in that way, because I need that personally. But I wouldn't say I take it for granted, but my experience is just that people around me are involved. And then the people that I meet through those people are also involved. And then I can go several hours away and speak at a workshop and see several people that like I know and that I've seen who have helped me with some of these, I suppose, AA tools, if
Yeah.
we're calling them that.
Yeah, I think we're fortunate that we got sober where we did, and probably in the groups that we did, where it was a three legacy group, and you had all aspects of stuff kind of firing. Because yeah, when you were saying that, I mean, like the group I was in, I didn't know any of that stuff was an option. I mean, you just immediately like got there to help them sit up. You helped them tear down. You went to uh, the mental health and the detox on Sunday night. You started going to the prison when you were able to. I mean, that was just looking back on it, it was like never really an option. And they didn't like beat you into it. You just did it, And I think I've been guilty over the years of being kind of maybe naive, thinking that everybody has been exposed to that,
Hmm.
and they haven't.
They haven't. I had a very different experience than both of you had.
Yeah.
I got sober originally at a group that met at a club. And honestly, I don't even know what the name of that group is because all they ever said was we go to the club. It was one of those, right?
Where you
And
remember? I'm a
so
member at the club.
that's
Get
right.
the club.
I guess the group had a name. I don't know. But and it was that and nobody was talking about service or talking about traditions. It was after I left that group and went to another group that I found out people were doing correction service. And I was like, oh, there's more. What's that? And then as I got involved and did a little something else, I found out there are traditions and they're important and we should study them, right? Because they matter. And so my experience was very different. I didn't come in a three legacy environment being told that this is what we do. I came in and people just went to meetings and did steps. And then
Hmm.
I found that out later as I went to other groups and met other people and got exposed to general service who said, this is important.
Hmm.
Well, I'm glad you were going to meetings where they work steps.
Yes.
That is a key component here also.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
God.
and the beauty of, I guess, tradition four is that, I mean, there's a lot of freedom in that and the autonomy because, Alcoholics Anonymous we're not like franchised, and there's no, main office or general service office telling groups what they can do. A group can really do whatever it wants to do. And so if groups want to meet in a club, they can. If groups want to have, you know, a, an alternative format, they can. If they want to read certain things, they can. If they want to pray certain things, they can. Um, I like the example you sent me, Shank, on the Bill Wilson wrote in that Grapevine in 1948, I think it was, that if a group wanted to hire a preacher to give a talk and pay for it out of the funds from their nightclub, that they could do that.
They could do that.
Probably wasn't wise, but that they could do that.
They
Oh,
sure could.
yep.
Well,
What are some things?
sorry.
Go ahead, Tammy.
No, it's a funny example because we all laughed, right? And how ridiculous that sounds. But they could. But that's where I think the whole concept of AA being self-correcting comes in. That what I have to believe, if a group chooses to do that, hire a preacher and pay for it from the funds with their nightclub, that what I have to assume is that the group is not carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous, probably, right? And
Right.
are they going to stay around, based on our traditions? Maybe not. I have to believe that they probably wouldn't. But it is an extreme funny example of what we can do if we want to.
Yes. Yeah. I think I've known some groups that have done some similar things.
Mhm.
What's something, I know there's an old story about when Akron and Cleveland started writing their own literature. They started writing their own pamphlets, and folks in New York didn't like it. Um, that's part of how this tradition got written. If you, it's in one of the books. And so, Cleveland and Akron was writing literature, and they were purporting it to be AA literature, and it really wasn't. What's something that a group could do nowadays that would affect another group? Or have you seen anything like that where?
The only thing that comes to mind that I've ever heard of really in relation to this tradition, I don't know it's exactly what you're talking about, but when another group is starting up on the same group night as someone else. Like someone recently has brought that to me, which different scenario. It didn't matter in the long run, but
Yeah.
that's the only thing that I've ever really heard in relation to. I mean, I haven't been around as both of
So if
you
we were
all,
going
but
to
in
start a
relation
new
to this.
so if we were going to start a new group like next to another group that was already meeting on the same night, you'd want to talk to
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess if a group was going to decide to like maybe put up some billboards in a local town and have Tammy's face on it and say, "Come get our brand of AA," that might be something. That'd be an
Oh, my,
example.
that's an example of a lot of traditions we may be running afoul of there. Not just this one.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about this, obviously coming up to the podcast, and I think the examples that I can think of might harm other groups, but mine probably lean a little bit more to the potentially harming AA as a whole, a little bit. So there were a couple examples I thought of. One of them is I've had an opportunity to facilitate a couple of group inventories. And if I'm in your area and you want a group inventory facilitated, I am available. I think that is one of the most fun things to do. Because I'm geeky like that, right? Like,
I'm
I
going to
think it
start
is
giving
so
them
fun.
your number then.
Yep.
So, anyway, I had an opportunity to do this. So went to this one group, and as we were asking questions and kind of delving through the group inventory, the group shared with us that they allow Al-Anons to come to their meeting, which is fine because it was an open meeting. But they also allowed the Al-Anons to share in the meeting.
Mm.
These people did not have a problem with alcohol. They were not alcoholics. They were Al-Anons. And they also allowed that people who did not identify as alcoholics to put money in the basket. And so as we went through the group inventory, we asked those questions. Do you see how this, may be okay, not okay, putting money in the basket? And so do these actions run afoul of any of our other traditions? Like, in my opinion, the answer is yes, right? That tradition 5 talks very specifically about singleness of purpose, that tradition 7 talks very clearly about how we don't accept outside contributions. And I believe both of those actions might have been contrary to what those two traditions are trying to say. But when those ideas were brought up to this group, they said, what do you think they said?
We're
Autonomy.
still doing it.
We are autonomous and we can do what we want. That's
Yeah.
exactly what they said. And so one of the things that I find
That's
interesting
awesome.
about tradition 4, and I've read a couple of articles and heard people talk about it, and one of the reasons I was really excited to talk about tradition 4 is because this is the tradition that is used as a weapon, right? This is our weapon against how I can do whatever I want to do because this is my group and you said I could do whatever I want to do. And then they say autonomy, period. You know, what I often hear is we're autonomous, period. And then there's that whole other part of the 4th tradition that talks about except when. And, a lot of the questions talk about that. Do we think about these things when we make decisions at our group? Do we think about these things? And this group, they heard the arguments and they said, we're autonomous, period. Right. And that was the end of that. And when I think about those kind of things, I think it could affect neighboring groups. What if the newcomer comes in and says, oh, I'm going to bring my mom and my sister and everybody because they can benefit from AA and they can share and they can put money in. And does that affect neighboring groups or AA as a whole? Okay, maybe I'm getting a little extreme. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
It's a good point.
So those are the kind of things I think of. The other example that came to mind when I was thinking about, this particular topic of stepping on other traditions is I've been to a handful of groups, and this is what was the term, today's AA. This is not something that I saw happening except for in the last few years. Okay, that I will go to a group I've never been to, and when the readings are passed out and how it works is read, the steps are read, the traditions are read, something out of the big book, something out of the 12 and 12. When the reader reads it, they read it as they want to read it, not as it's been written. And so when I think about that happening, I hear that. And I mean, as a starting point, I cringe a little bit, right? I cringe because I know what it's supposed to, I know what it says as it's written, right? But take aside, what I think about that. So let's just say I agree with the reader. I don't agree with the reader. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant whether I agree or disagree with the reader and how they have chosen to change whatever words, that they didn't care for. Here's the reality. The reality is at present, the General Service Conference has approved the literature as it is currently written. They have not changed any of well, except for the changes they made to the 12 and 12, but what I'm talking about has not been changed, right? So the General Service Conference is the collective conscience of AA as a whole. It's supposed to represent the collective conscience of AA as a whole, and the literature is written as it's written. So tradition 2 says that God speaks to the group conscience, right? Right. So when I kind of extrapolate all of that, and I go to a meeting and you give me how it works, and I read it in Tammy's preferred version, and not the way that it's written, what I am saying is that I don't believe in the conscience of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't believe in the group conscience. And as a matter of fact, I know better than God, because I know what the words should say, because I'm always right? I'm going to insist that I'm right by reading the words like this. So I find, again, that this is where people say, but we're autonomous. I'm autonomous. We can do whatever we want. Well, sure. But I have to think about what kind of harm that may be doing to the newcomer, to the other groups, to AA as a whole. And did I when I made that choice? I don't know.
It's a good point.
That's pretty perceptive there, Tammy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad. I like that. I like how you tied it all together. I would have just said, why did they do that? They can't change the readings.
So at what point do you confer with the trustees of the General Service Board?
About people reading?
About any of it. Tradition 4 in the long form says, or individuals should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board.
I think that's why you have a General Service Conference process.
The structure, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, if I think that the book should be written differently, and as we all know, a lot of people think a lot of things should be written differently these days, right? Not good or bad or right or wrong. It's just the truth. It's the reality of what is happening today. So there is a structure for that. There is a process for that I, as an individual member, I can get with my group, I can get with my district, and get with my area. We can submit topics to the General Service Conference to be discussed. And they have been. They have been discussed, and my guess is they will continue to be discussed for sure the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, everyone who's listening to this already knew all of that, but maybe there's someone that didn't know that process.
Yeah. I like, this is another good tradition that has a lot of utility outside of a group. Meaning in your personal life of giving people autonomy to be themselves and not to try to control people, and think about how I always try to think about how my decisions impact other people. Whereas before, when I was drinking, I didn't even think about that. All I was concerned about was myself. And so the tradition has really taught me to really think through, like, how do my decisions impact other people? And what's the long-term effect of a decision? And I probably, if I'm going to do something that is going to impact somebody else, I probably should talk to that person first. Or if I'm going to do something that's going to affect a group of people, I probably should confer with them before I just go off and make my own decisions. So there's a lot of utility with the tradition there.
That reminds me of the tool pause when agitated, right? The restraint of tongue and pen. That my ability to harm and impact other people is great when I don't practice those things.
Yes, it sure is. Shank, you want to move on to meeting shrapnel?
All right. Meeting shrapnel, Tammy's favorite segment.
All right.
Our first meeting shrapnel is I've been sober a few 24 hours. Wow! What do y'all think about that one?
I'm excited to talk about this one. I'm actually, what I'm excited to hear is y'all's perspective of it. I mean, you guys may or may not be notorious for scrapping. Okay, so I mean, my starting place for this one is to keep it. Because I'll give you my reasons and my perception of this. So I don't say it exactly like this, but I have used this phrase many times. What I usually say is I've been sober a few days put together, which is, I mean, a very similar concept to a few 24 hours. And when I say that, I don't say it all the time. I say it in context to if I'm talking about how I used to be, how I used to think, what I used to do. And I may say, well, now that I've been sober a few days put together, or a few days, whatever, I think differently, I act differently, I do differently as it pertains to whatever the topic is, right? So I do use this. So the reason I prefer that is because when I think about, I've had a couple of situations where I've heard people use their amount of time sober almost as a my voice counts more type of thing, right? And I usually notice it. I'm not saying I always hear, but I usually notice it when we're at a controversial, for instance, any of the controversial topics that come up at General Service Conference. I'll go to roundtables and people are fired up, with their opinion and everything. And I'll hear somebody go up to the microphone to give their opinion when it's their turn. And they'll say, well, I've been sober for 40 years. And it's like, it's irrelevant to the conversation, right? It's irrelevant. You get your voice, you get your vote, but it's almost used as I've been sober longer, my vote should count a little bit more, right? And so I think I like this because it doesn't carry that connotation of my voice counts more, or arrogance or anything like that.
But I'll tell you, so when I was new, and people would say, like, I've been sober a few 24 hours or a few days put together, then all I could think was, how long has this person been sober? Like, I would just listen for context clues within their story.
Yes.
I wasn't listening to any of the solution. And I was just like, ooh, okay, went to a Pink Floyd concert. That puts us in a certain area. Okay, how old do I think this person is? Like, I just would try to figure it out. Somewhere, okay, in the last 11 years, somewhere about midway, I started to learn that people that had time, that probably had what I wanted, either didn't say anything about how long they would have been sober or said something like you say, Tammy. So I'm like, okay, that person probably, they're not trying to gloat. They're not trying to say, well, I've been sober for X amount of time. However, then there will be people who will say like, well, I've been sober for a while and they've been sober for like 2 weeks this time. So it's very difficult. Like, as I go to meetings and different places, the longer I stay sober, it's like, I just want to know how long you've been sober. And it's not to make a judgment about your sobriety, because there are plenty of people that I know that have a lot of time that, like, I don't want to emulate what they have. Some people may. I don't. But, like, I just want to know, like, please just tell me. Just tell me the thing. I don't want to have to figure it out. We were talking about this in the Tradition 3, where it's just like when people talk about powder form of alcohol or this, just tell me what you're talking about. Because now I'm confused. I'm not paying attention because I'm looking for a context clue of something else.
it's a funny one to me. I always hear the term cracks me up. I'm kind of neutral on it, but you hear these like, I've been sober a few 24 hours. You know, you'll hear people say it like that, and it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? And I cringe when people that have been sober for a long time that like use it as like a badge or to one up you or to, you know, to say that they've got, you know, their opinion is more valuable. There's just got to be a better way to say it. Maybe just, I don't know. I do think that sometimes your length, you don't hear this much, but I do sometimes think your length of sobriety is relevant. And that there's no substitute for experience. So sometimes I think people need to know that, well, hell, you got experience and you've been sober for a while. That's why you're saying this. So, but I don't know. There's just got to be a better way to say it. I don't know what it would be. But this particular statement, the people that I hear say it just cracks me up the way that they do it. I don't know. I'm not.
It's a good point, because I think the way it's said could matter. It could make
Sometimes.
a difference in how I perceive it.
Yeah. So.
Well, I want to scrap it. I don't know about y'all, but I'm voting first, and I want to scrap it because I just want people to say how long they've been sober. Dang it!
That's probably the best. That'd be the most honest thing, I guess. Right? Would be. Tammy, what are you going to do? You going to keep it or scrap it?
So I came into the argument open-minded. I definitely had an opinion, but I came into the argument open-minded, and I can definitely see the arguments to scrap. But I think I am so turned off by the alternatives that I see that I would rather keep it.
Okay.
All right, Jerry.
Well, to me, it just sounds kind of like when people say, yeah, I did outside issues. Just say what you did. So, I mean, a few 24 hours. If you've been sober for a number of years, that's more than a few 24 hours. So it's not completely honest. I'm going to.
Oh my gosh.
That's a stretch. I know that's a stretch, Tammy.
I was going to say, you're really stretching out.
That's a stretch, but I'm scrapping it. Shank?
It's out of here.
All right.
I don't want to play with y'all anymore. No, I'm
No,
kidding.
come on.
I'm getting
totally
my ball
kidding.
and going home. All right. Meeting shrapnel number 2. And I think that this may be one that I think maybe I changed the language on it. So if you submitted it, I think I
Yeah,
changed
somebody
it.
emailed this one to us.
It's
Yeah.
You got to clean up what you messed up. But that may not have been exactly how it was stated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I didn't for a minute, but yeah. So I mean, some are quicker than others, and I don't fall in that category today. So, so I don't love this one by any stretch. It's just so slangy, so casual, so like. I don't know. It's just this is one where I'm going to use your argument from the last shrapnel. Like, just say what you mean. Like, just say it, right? Like, what are you trying to tell me? You're trying to tell me work the steps. You're trying to tell me do a step 10. You tell me I need to make some amends. You know, why don't you say that? And so it's just too slangy and casual for me. I'd rather say, work some steps.
What do you think, Jerry?
I think I have heard one person say it. I don't think it's one that you would hear a lot. I don't know. It's dumb to me. I mean, you got to clean up what you messed up. I mean, what's he saying? Do steps 8 and 9? Yeah, I think that sounds like it came straight from an NA meeting.
Maybe.
Shank, what do you think?
I agree with both of you all. I think it just, just say you need to work some steps. You need to do an inventory. You need to make some amends. Like, for me, when I arrived in AA, this was like a duh. So I much preferred people saying, here's exactly how you do it. There's a book. There are steps. Get a sponsor. I think scrap it.
Tammy?
I would like to scrap it.
All right, I'm scrapping it. Shank?
All right, it's out of here.
All right, what's next?
So our last meeting shrapnel today is I'm not a bad person trying to get good. I'm a sick person trying to get well.
Yeah, so this one I dislike on a lot of levels. So for a lot of levels. So the first thing is, call it a sick people. Just to me sounds like the whole idea of, the disease concept of alcoholics, that people who talk about their disease of alcoholism, like, I don't have a disease. Like, what I have is an allergy that's been coupled with an obsession of the mind that has been relieved because I have worked the steps and trusted God, right? So that's all great. So it sounds like it's reverting back to that whole I have a disease thing. I don't, like, and so that's one. And the other, for some reason, it strikes me as sounding like an excuse to shirk responsibility, right? Like, I'm just a sick person trying, I don't know. It just sounds like it's an excuse to do bad, right? And I just don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't like it for all of those reasons, but also there are some bad people trying to get good in AA and otherwise. I mean, I've met like a few bad people in AA.
Yeah.
And they're probably the ones that were saying this in the meeting. I don't know.
I love this one.
Of course. Of course.
It gave me so much hope when I was newly sober.
You say it at every meeting now and pass it on to the newcomer?
All the time, man. I say it. I got bumper stickers that say it. I give it all new people. No, it is like the my disease made me do it type mentality, and like it's an excuse for inappropriate behavior, or I'm always going to be sick. I'm never going to get well, and you hear it a lot. Used to hear it a whole lot. It came straight out of a treatment center. But I think that it's not something I would say. Tammy, what do you want to do with it?
So I would like to super scrap it. Is that a possibility? Or maybe if I tell you how many years I've been sober, my vote can count twice and Jerry's counts 3 times. So I don't know. I may have to think about this, right?
Now hey, we've got autonomy to do that.
Oh my God, super scrap.
You get 2 votes, I get 3 votes, and Shank gets 1 vote.
First time in 5 seasons. Now we're introducing this super scrap. Super scrap by Tammy.
I love it. Oh man! So if you're gonna super scrapping it, we don't need to vote. It's gone. That's like
it's a super scrap.
It's a super scrap.
It's powerful.
Out of here. It's out of here.
Oh my goodness! All right, it's gone.
It's gone.
Tammy, we appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience with us.
Thank you so much for having me back. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys. You're doing good work out there.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great
see
having you. And remember that autonomy gives us a lot of freedom. Thanks for listening. If you have a comment, suggestion, or just need help, you can email Shank and Wayne at freedom@alcoholicsalive.com. Remember, we're recovered members of Alcoholics Anonymous, but we do not speak for Alcoholics Anonymous, nor do we get paid. Join us next week for another great episode.